Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the show. It's terrific to have you back again with us. Tonight we're doing things a little bit differently. I'm on my Ken Burns mode tonight. We're going to be looking at some history. I'm going to drop some knowledge on you fools. We're talking about Philadelphia, Philly, the city of brotherly love. Now, I know historically Love Park and City Hall are the spots that have been written into the history books time and time again. Tonight, I want to focus on another spot, not nearly as popular as Love Park, for example, but in my opinion, just as important to Philadelphia and world skateboarding history. This is the story of the Afro Banks. Our story begins in 1976, on the eve of America's bicentennial, in the city where it was founded. And it was during the bicentennial celebrations that the city of Philadelphia dedicated the Afro-American Historical and Cultural Museum. Now a relatively commonplace idea, this was the first museum of its kind that was intended to help preserve the cultural heritage of African Americans. To accompany the museum's dedication, the organizers commissioned an original piece by the sculptor John Roden. Roden was just the man for the job. By 1976, he was an accomplished bronze sculptor. Originally from Birmingham, Alabama, Roden had attended Talladega College on an art scholarship. It was there that he met Hale Woodruff, who was a visiting professor at Talladega as well as an accomplished muralist. Woodruff suggested he move to New York in order to seek mentorship and springboard his career. While in New York, Roden had the opportunity to study under Richmond Barthé. Barthé had already made a name for himself as the preeminent bronze sculptor of the Harlem Renaissance. Roden would remain in the Northeast for the rest of his life. He went on to create numerous public installations in and around New York and Philadelphia. Many of Roden's large-scale works in bronze are still standing today, such as the piece titled Mitochondria, which was commissioned for Bellevue Hospital in New York City. You can still see this centerpiece of Bellevue's sobriety garden from the exit off of FDR Drive, albeit a little bit obscured by the foliage. So we find Roden in 1976 having been tapped by Philadelphia to commemorate the opening of the Afro-American Museum for the bicentennial. Roden began work on a piece that leveraged his study of the stylized forms of African art as well as those of the Native Americans. He named the piece Nesaika, which, according to Roden, means us, we, or our in a Chinook jargon of West African trade languages. And on June 10, 1976, Nesaika was unveiled at the opening of the African American Museum in Philadelphia. The completed sculpture was installed upon a plinth of intricate brickwork with a shape that can only be described as volcano. And on that day in 1976, Roden, with his design work, had inadvertently changed the trajectory of Philadelphia's skateboarding history. Before the end of the 1970s, skateboarding was already happening in its 1970s kind of way just over the river at the Cherry Hill Skate Park in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It was there at this frankly terrifying 1970s style skate park where the types of maneuvers required to ride the harsh transitions of the Afro Banks were being incubated in real time. While I'm not personally aware of any photos or footage of people skating the banks in the late 70s, I have to imagine that at least somebody in the area had gone there and sized it up. And by the mid-1980s, I'm certain that the Afro Banks were skated frequently by the locals of Philadelphia's budding street skateboarding scene. I know this because I asked one of them. Uncle Ted got me in touch with Roger Brown, who was a central figure of the early Philly street skating scene.
I used to skate with this guy, Dennis Askins. We sessioned Afro Banks a lot. That was like mid 80s, like 86, 87.
Okay.
I would say when I first got to Philly, the only skaters I ran into Chuck eventually, Chuck Treese.
Yep.
This guy, Bruce Momich. And then I skated this guy, Steve I. And I probably skated with those guys at Afro Banks. But yeah, it was one of those spots, I mean, it immediately stands out. And, you know, when ollies weren't really developed, you know, before that, you could always skate the Afro Banks and do, you know, transition tricks on it, although it was rather tight. So yeah, ledges really didn't get into vogue until like 88 or something like that. So that was probably the premier spot at one time in Philly. You know, it was always a short, you know, it depends. Sometimes it was a half-hour session at, you know, 10, 11 at night. Sometimes it was a quick, you know, 5 minutes and then you were kicked out. But it's one of those constants, considering Philly always, you know, spots get hot and then they get altered or refurbished or changed or whatever.
Sure.
That was all constant, you know.
I really appreciate Roger's help with the invaluable historical context on the Afro Banks. I also really appreciate the point that he makes at the end about the longevity of the spot, especially when you consider that Love Park was built 10 years before the Afro Banks. The first time anybody sees Philadelphia skateboarding on footage is from Roger's part in Santa Cruz's Troops of Tomorrow video from 1991. However, there isn't a single clip of him skating the Afro Banks, or anyone else for that matter. And it isn't until 1994 that we see the banks in full effect as captured by Dan Wolfe in the Sub-Zero real-life video, where Matt Reason and Fred Gall put a hurtin' on the thing. And throughout the mid to late 90s, the banks continued to be skated by locals such as Ricky Oyola, as well as other East Coast skaters, including Quim Cardona and Tim O'Connor. At the end of the 90s, heading into the new millennium, ledges and technical skating had all but supplanted transition in skateboarding's cultural zeitgeist, at least until skaters such as Bobby Puleo and Jack Savick come back in the early 2000s, where they showcase some of that less is more attitude. Static 2 and Static 3 both have some great Afro Banks clips going on, but in 2008, disaster struck when the city put a stop to skating the Afro Banks for good. Or so we thought. 12 years later, it was back on at the banks, thanks to a brave crew of miscreants who took matters into their own hands. And even though it's not explicitly known that John Roden was aware of his impact on skateboarding, he seems like the kind of person who would have really enjoyed it. Not only did he create a delightful piece of public art, he inadvertently created a meaningful cultural artifact for skateboarders across multiple generations. How lucky are we to see this generation's best and brightest putting their spin on a spot that's been skated since the 1970s. The Afro Banks continues to be a proving ground for the new Bobby Puleo or the new Fred Gall, or the old Fred Gall for that matter. There are no guarantees in this life, so get there while you can. Although I heard it's way harder to skate in person, and everything cool's already been done.